Snow fell on the city of Beihuang the night the third young master of the Xian clan was supposed to die. It fell soft. It fell quiet. The kind of snow that swallows footsteps and muffles screams. The kind of snow that, in the old stories told around campfires on the frontier, the gods themselves used to wash blood off the world before morning so the children can play in fresh white. The torches along the walls of the Xian palace burned blue at their edges from the cold. The two stone wolves that flanked the great gate were buried up to their throats. Inside the inner courts, in a quiet wing far from the warmth of the family halls, in a room where the brazier had not been refilled and the windows had been left unbarred so the wind could come and go as it pleased, a 16-year-old boy was dying. His name was Xuan Ye. He was beautiful. Even half dead, he was beautiful, pale as carved jade, with long dark lashes and lips the color of plum frost. His hair, black and fine as ink poured into silk, fanned across a pillow that smelled faintly of the medicine he had been forced to drink every morning of his short life. His chest barely moved. His fingers, slender as a scholar's, were curled around a small bronze cup whose insides were stained with a thin film of green that no medicine should ever leave. The cup had been a birthday gift. A cousin from a branch family had pressed it into his hand at the banquet that evening with a wide white smile and said, "Drink this for me, little Ye. It is wine from the southern provinces, and they say it cures even the weakest constitutions. Drink, drink. Your big brothers will be so pleased to see you stronger by morning." Xuan Ye had drunk it. He had drunk it because he was 16 years old and lonely and grateful, because his cousin had smiled at him for the first time in a year, because his two older brothers were across the hall laughing with the soldiers, and he had not wanted to interrupt them with his small complaints. He had drunk it, and he had felt warmth, and then he had felt very cold, and then he had felt nothing at all. Only a curious idea, floating up through the dark like a fish coming to look at the surface of a winter pond. Oh, the idea said, so this is how the trash dies. And then the boy in the bed died. But before the last breath left his lips, in the half-second between one heartbeat and no heartbeat, somewhere far away, in another world entirely, in a place where the rain was sharp and tasted of gasoline and city air, another man was also dying. And that man, that other dying man, had a very strange last thought. His last thought was this: if there is anyone listening, any god, any devil, anyone at all, let me come back. Just once. And this time, let me be the villain. Snow fell on the Xian palace. Snow fell on a city in another world too, but it was not snow there. It was rain. And somewhere between the two threads of fate that should never have touched each other reached out across the dark and braided. His name had been Chen Mo. In Mandarin, the characters meant silent ink. His grandmother had given him the name before she died, and when he was a small boy he used to trace the second character on the inside of his palm with his fingertip, slowly, because he liked the way the brushstrokes folded into each other, quiet, patient, controlled. He used to think a name like that was a kind of promise. A person named Silent Ink could not be loud, or greedy, or cruel. He had to be steady. He had to be useful. He had to be good. Chen Mo had been good. He had been good when his parents died in a fire when he was 9, and the relatives split his inheritance among themselves like a pack of dogs splitting a bone, and the cousin who took him and beat him every time the rice bowl in front of his own son was emptier than expected. He had been good through that. He had grown up small and quiet, and had learned to read by candle stubs, and had won a scholarship to a city far away, and had paid for the rest of his schooling by working 3 jobs at once, which is to say he had not really slept for several years. He had been good in university, when his roommates stole his laptop and his savings together and disappeared, and when Xuan Mo found him 6 months later sleeping in an alley with a fever. He had carried the boy to the hospital and paid for his treatment with money he had borrowed against his own future, and the boy had cried and said, "Brother, I will pay you back, I swear," and Chen Mo had nodded and said, "Take your time." and of course had never seen a single coin again. He had been good as an architect, building beautiful, modest little houses for families who could barely afford them. He had been good as a friend, the kind who picked up the phone at 3 in the morning. He had been good as a fiancé, faithful and patient with a girl who had said she loved him for his kindness, and who had then left him for a man with a better car, on the grounds that kindness is fine. Chen Mo, but kindness does not buy apartments. He had been good even on the last day of his life. It had been raining in the city. The kind of cold spring rain that turns gutters into thin gray rivers and makes the headlights of cars bloom across wet glass. Xuan Mo had been walking home, the same long walk he took every evening because he could not afford a car and would not borrow one, and he had seen a child slip on the curb in front of an oncoming bus. He did not think. He had never been the kind of man who thought, in moments like that. He had simply moved. The child lived. Chen Mo did not. He lay on the wet asphalt with his ribs broken in a way he could feel and his lungs filling with something warm that he understood, even without medical training, was not supposed to be there. The rain came down on his face. The headlights swam above him like fish in a dark pond. He could hear the child crying somewhere, alive, and that was good. That was very good. People gathered. People always gather. A man with a phone leaned over him and took a photograph and walked away. A woman screamed and called for an ambulance. A young guy in a hoodie crouched by his head and patted him gently on the cheek and said, "Brother, hang in there, hang in there." And Chen Mo felt those gentle fingers slide into the pocket of his coat and ease out his wallet, and then ease out his phone, and then ease back and disappear into the crowd. The young man in the hoodie did not run. He did not even look guilty. He simply walked away into the rain with Chen Mo's last things in his pocket, and Chen Mo, lying on the asphalt with the rainwater pooling in the hollow of his throat, found that he could not even be angry. He was tired. He had been so tired for so long. He had been good for 31 years, and the world had eaten him for 31 years, one slow bite at a time, and now it was finishing the meal. And as the cold crept up his fingers and the lights began to dim, Chen Mo, who had never in his life thought a cruel thought one. I should have been the villain, he thought. Asterisk all this time. I should have been the villain, asterisk. The wolves don't lose their wallets in the rain. The wolves don't pay for their roommates' hospital bills. The wolves don't bleed out on wet asphalt while strangers take pictures of the dying. The wolves get full. Asterisk if there is anyone listening, any god, any devil, anyone at all, let me come back. Just once. And this time, asterisk. Let me be the villain. The rain came down. The lights went out. And somewhere, in a country that did not exist on any map Chen Mo had ever studied, in a world whose stars he had never seen, a 16-year-old boy named Xuan Ye drew his last breath. But the bed was warm now, and the bed was warm because something was burning under the skin of the boy in it. A small, dark, patient ember that had not been there a moment ago, and it was just beginning to wake up. Pain came first. Not the soft, drifting pain of a man dying on wet asphalt. This was a different pain, a sharp, prickling burn that started in the chest and ran like fire ants out along the arms and legs, up the throat, into the eyes. It was the pain of a body that had been very, very close to death and was now being dragged, against its will, back over the edge. Chen Mo opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was not the ceiling of his apartment. It was not the ceiling of any hospital. It was wood, dark, old wood, carved at the edges with a pattern of mountains and clouds. A single oil lamp guttered somewhere off to his right, throwing slow shadows. The air smelled of incense and bitter herbs, and very faintly, underneath, of something metallic. Blood, maybe, or copper. He did not move. This was the first interesting thing about him. A normal man, a man who has just woken up in a body he does not recognize, in a room he does not recognize, in what is increasingly obviously not the world he died in, would jolt upright, would gasp, would cry out. Chen Mo did not. He lay still. He breathed slowly. He let his eyes move first, before any limb. He counted the beams in the ceiling. He counted the shadows. He measured the distance from his head to the door by the way the lamplight moved when a draft came in. He listened and learned, from the silence, that whoever had put him here did not think he was worth guarding. Only then, only when he had drawn a picture of the room in his mind and was certain there was no one breathing in it but him, did Xuan Mo turn his head. A bronze cup lay on the floor beside the bed, tipped over. A thin film of green dried on its inner curve. The first thought that came was strange. It came not as a thought, but as a memory that did not belong to him. A boy's memory. Asterisk, Cousin Wei gave it to me. He said it was wine. He said I would feel better in the morning. Asterisk. The voice in the memory was young, soft, pathetically grateful. The voice of a boy who had been so starved for kindness that he had drunk poison from a smiling man. And then more memories came. They came not all at once, but in waves, like water rising into a flooded basement, finding every corner, every crack. Chen Mo lay very still and let them come. He had a name now. The name was Xuan Ye. He was the third son of the Xian clan of the north. His father, Xuan Ye, was the king of the north, Wang, a man whose sword was said to have once cut a demon beast the size of a mountain in half. A man who had not been home in 3 years because he was guarding the frontier from things that did not have names in any polite language. A man who, when he was home, looked at his weak third son with neither love nor hate, only the quiet disappointment of a tiger who has noticed that one of his cubs cannot run. His eldest brother was Xin Shun, 18, already at the late stage of foundation establishment, called the Sword Star of the North by men who had seen him in the practice yards. He was tall, severe, beautiful in the way a drawn blade is beautiful. He spoke rarely. He smiled less. But when the mother died, the only one who had ever called Xuan Ye by his milk name, Xin Shun had carried his small weeping brother on his back for 3 days and 3 nights through the funeral rites, and had not put him down even when his own legs trembled. His second brother was Xin Yu, 17, mid-foundation establishment, called the Spear King's heir. He was the warm one, the one who laughed too loud at his own jokes, the one who, when Xuan Ye coughed blood for the first time at age 11, and the elders began muttering about how the third young master was a waste of family resources, had picked up his spear and walked into the elders' hall and stood there in silence until the elders, one by one, found somewhere else to be. His own mother, Xuan Ye's mother, had been the king of the north's second wife, a beautiful, gentle woman from a southern merchant family. She had died of consumption when he was 7. Xin Shun and Xuan Yu were the children of the first wife, a noblewoman who had died in childbirth with Xuan Yu. The current madam of the Xian household, Madame Su, was a third wife, a political match, who tolerated Xuan Ye the way one tolerates a stray cat in the garden. She fed him. She did not pet him. Xuan Ye was 16 years old. He had been born with what the cultivators called a broken-meridian. A spiritual root so thin and frayed that no amount of pills, no amount of medicine, no amount of qi tempering could draw heaven and earth energy into his dantian. He had been unable to cultivate. In a world where cultivation was the difference between a duke and a peasant, between a long life and a short one, between a man and a worm, the third young master of the Xian clan was a worm. The cousin who had given him the bronze cup tonight, a young man named Wei Lan, from the maternal side branch family that lived as guests in the Xian estate, had not, in fact, given him medicine. He had given him a poison called soul-quieting powder, a common assassin's tool, cheap, slow, mistakable, in a sickly boy for a natural decline. Wei Lan had been paid. Xuan Ye, lying in the bed in the dark, with the memories of the dead boy settling around him like leaves around a stone, did not yet know who had paid Wei Lan. But he would find out. He closed his eyes. Then he opened them. And then, slowly, very slowly, the way a man sits up after a long illness, the way a man does when he wants every muscle to remember that he is still alive. He sat up in the bed. He felt his ribs. They were thin but whole. He felt his fingers. They were cold but functional. He felt the inside of his mouth with his tongue. The sour ghost of poison was there, faint. The poison had killed the boy, but only just. Something had pulled him back in the last half second, when the soul was already halfway out the door. Something had reached out and snatched the dying body and stuffed Chen Mo into it like a hand into an old glove. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. He stood. The floor was cold under his bare feet. On the far wall there was a bronze mirror, polished to a soft amber gleam, hung on a wooden frame carved with cranes. Chen Mo walked to it, slowly, because the legs were thin and weak. He stood in front of it. He looked. For a long moment, he did not breathe. In his old life, in the life of Chen Mo, architect, orphan, fool, he had been an ordinary-looking man. A pleasant face, not unhandsome, not memorable. The kind of face that other faces walk past without noticing. The kind of face the universe assigns to the people it does not intend to spoil. The face in the mirror in front of him was not that face. The face in the mirror was beautiful in a way that did not belong in the same world as wet asphalt and stolen wallets. The bones were fine and high. The jaw was clean. The lips were full and slightly parted, still pale from poison. The eyes were long and dark and very, very still. The lashes were so long they cast shadows on the cheekbones. The skin was the color of moonlight pooled on jade. It was the face of a young prince in a painting. It was the face of a boy who, if he had been healthy, would have made the daughters of the 7 provinces fight one another in their letters home. Chen Mo looked at this face, his face now, and his mouth did a slow, surprised thing. It smiled. The smile, at first, was small and human. A smile of curiosity. A hush smile. The smile of a man checking a new pair of shoes. And then the smile changed. The corners stayed where they were. The lips stayed where they were. But something behind the eyes, something far back, deep in the dark where the soul lives, slid open like a panel in a wall. And what looked out from behind that panel was not the boy Xuan Ye. It was not Chen Mo either. It was the thing Chen Mo had been carrying inside himself, quietly, his whole long, stupid life. The thing he had refused to let out. The thing that had watched, from behind his ribs, as the world ate him. The wolf. The wolf, finally, had been led into the room. Xuan Ye, Chen Mo said softly, and his new voice was low and pleasant and a little husky, and it pleased him. Xuan Ye, yes, I think I can wear that. He turned away from the mirror. He went back to the bed and sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. He stared into the small flame of the oil lamp on the table. And he began, very carefully, to think. It was while he was thinking that the ember in his chest woke up. He had felt it earlier, dimly, as a warmth, a small private warmth tucked under the breastbone of his new body, like a coal banked beneath ash. He had assumed it was the last heat of the poison burning out, or fever. He had been wrong. It was not heat. It was a presence. The presence stirred. The presence noticed him noticing it. And then, in a way that was not quite a voice and not quite a vision, but something on the seam between the two, it spoke. Air of accumulated grievance, said the not voice. Welcome. Chen Mo did not move. He had been spoken to inside his own skull before. He had read about such things in the records of cultivators, in the memories Xuan Ye had left behind for him. But knowing that something is possible and feeling it happen to you are two different countries. He did not panic. Panic was for other people. Who are you? He thought, calmly, the way one addresses a strange dog through a fence. I am the 9 Nether heaven-devouring Codex, said the not voice. Or what is left of me. I was once a thing of greater scope. The years have eaten me as I have eaten others. I am a fragment now. But fragments, child, are still teeth. Why are you in me? Because you carry a wound the heavens cannot mend, said the Codex. A grievance of one entire life, lived clean, and rewarded with rot. The accumulated wronged karma of a man who was good in a place that hated good. Such a wound is rare. Such a wound is delicious. I followed the scent of it across the dark. I climbed it like a vine. And what do you want? Want. The knot voice was almost amused. I want what you want, Chen Mo, who is no longer Chen Mo. I want to grow fat on the things that wronged us. Chen Mo sat very still. The cold floor pressed against the soles of his feet. The oil lamp guttered. Outside, somewhere far away, a watch bell rang the hour. Tell me what you do, he thought. The Codex told him. It told him that the body he was wearing was not, in fact, broken. The boy Xuan Ye had been born with a true spiritual root, a rare one, buried so deep, so tightly sealed by the same accumulated misfortune that had drawn the Codex across the heavens, that no examining elder had ever found it. The seal was a tomb. The boy had been buried alive in his own meridians from birth. The Codex had cracked the tomb. The Codex was already, even as they spoke, dissolving the seal like acid eating through wax. It told him that he could now cultivate. It told him, further, that he would cultivate faster than any of his brothers, faster than any of the geniuses of the 7 provinces, but on one condition. The Codex did not feed on heaven and earth chi the way other techniques did. The Codex fed on what it called the karma of grievance. Every time someone hurt him and failed to break him, the residue of that failed cruelty, the karmic weight of the attempt, would flow into the Codex, and the Codex would turn it into cultivation. Every time someone schemed against him and the scheme came apart, the fortune that had been stolen for that scheme, the favor of heaven they had spent on it, would flow into him as well. Every time he killed an enemy cleanly, the karma of that enemy's unfinished ambitions, their unspent fate, would settle into his dantian like silt. The more people underestimated him, the faster he would grow. The more they hated him in private and smiled at him in public, the fatter the Codex would feed. The more cleanly, the more invisibly, the more quietly he did his work, the more karma stuck. There was a catch. Of course there was a catch. Chen Mo had not lived 31 years and 1 death to believe in gifts. The catch was this. The Codex did not work for a man who was honestly weak. It did not work for a saint. It worked only for a man who pretended, a man who chose, deliberately, knowingly, to wear weakness like a mask. The mask had to be sincere on the outside and a lie on the inside. The Codex could only swallow karma that came to a trap, and a trap is only a trap when the prey thinks it is taking the easy meal. The boy Xuan Ye, before tonight, had been honestly weak. The Codex could do nothing with that. Chen Mo, wearing his face, would not be. Do you understand? The Codex asked. Chen Mo considered. In another world, in another life, a man named Chen Mo would have asked questions. Where did you come from? Whose body did you ride before mine? Why me? Is this evil? Is there a price for the soul? Is there a way out? The wolf, sitting in Chen Mo's place, asked none of these. I understand, he thought. Will you take it? He thought of the wet asphalt. He thought of the young man in the hoodie sliding 2 fingers into his pocket and walking away into the rain. He thought of his fiancée saying kindness does not buy apartments. He thought of the cousin tonight, Wei Lan, with his wide white smile, pressing the bronze cup into a small shaking hand. He thought of his 2 brothers in this new world, the boys whose memories had folded themselves into his mind like prayers. Xian Shun carrying a weeping little boy on his back for 3 days. Xian Yu standing silent in the elder's hall with a spear in his fist. The brothers, he understood already, were the problem. The brothers were the soft place. The brothers were the part of him that, if he was not careful, would get him killed again. I will take it, he thought. Asterisk on my terms. The mask stays on. The blade stays hidden. No one, not the man who poisoned me, not the man who paid the man who poisoned me, not my own brothers, sees the wolf. Not until the wolf decides. Asterisk. Agreed. The ember under his breastbone, which had been a soft warmth, became, for one perfect instant, a fire. His meridians, which had been frayed silk for 16 years, sang. Heaven and earth chi, which the boy Xuan Ye had never tasted, came into him for the first time. It came shy at first, then in a rush. The room around him grew, very faintly, colder. Tendrils of pale white mist began to seep in through the cracked window, drawn toward him as if he were a small mouth in the dark, breathing in. When it stopped, minutes later, an hour later, he could not say. Chen Mo opened his eyes. He looked at his hand. There, in the soft hollow of his right palm, a small black mark had appeared. A character, or a sigil, or both. A curling shape that looked, if you tilted your head, like a sleeping wolf. He closed his hand. The mark vanished. He could feel it still, dormant, under the skin. He stood up. He no longer felt thin. He still looked thin, pale, fragile, perfectly pitiable. The face in the mirror was still the face of a sickly young prince. But underneath the skin, something had been switched on, and he could feel that he was, by the strange measure of this world, a cultivator now. Body tempering, first stage. It was, by the standards of his older brothers, embarrassingly low. It was, by the standards of the boy who had owned this body yesterday, miraculous. He bent and picked up the bronze cup from the floor. He turned it in his fingers. Then he set it back down on the table next to the lamp, very carefully, in exactly the position it had been in when Wei Lan had first set it there at the banquet. Handle out, lips slightly tilted, the green residue catching the light. He wanted whoever came in next to see it. He wanted them to remember. He had perhaps an hour, by his estimate, before they came. The hour was not wasted. He spent the first part of it walking the room, slowly, like a recovering invalid, and feeling his way through the body, testing how the legs moved, how the eyes focused, how fast he could think without the lungs complaining, cataloging, with the dry patience of an architect who has been handed a building someone else designed and intends to live in for the rest of his life. He spent the second part of it sitting back on the edge of the bed and reading, very slowly and very carefully, the boy's memories. He learned the names of every servant in the wing. The name of the old steward of the household, a man called Uncle Bo, who had once slipped Xuan Ye a hot bun in the kitchen on a winter morning when he was 8 years old, and who had been kind to him ever since in small, careful ways that no one else noticed. He learned the daily timetable of Madame Su, his stepmother, when she took tea, when she received visitors, when she walked the inner garden. He learned that Wei Lan, the cousin who had poisoned him, was the son of his stepmother's younger sister, a woman married into a minor branch family, in chronic debt, in chronic resentment. He learned the names and ranks of the 4 imperial princes who had visited Beihuang in the last 2 years on various pretexts. The 2nd Prince Lu Zhao, the 4th Prince Lu Hong, the 5th Prince Lu Yin, the 7th Prince Lu Shu. He learned, from a small, overheard conversation Xuan Ye had once not understood, that the 2nd Prince's faction was reaching into the north. That the 2nd Prince had begun to send envoys to the northern noble houses, just to pay respects, just to maintain the cordial relationship between the throne and the frontier. That his eldest brother Xian Chun had begun, in the past year, refusing more and more invitations to the capital. That his 2nd brother Xuan Yu had begun, in the past year, drinking more. He learned that the emperor was 67 years old and his health was failing. He learned that there were 7 princes and 2 princesses born of the empress and her 3 highest consorts. That the eldest princess had been seen riding through the streets of the capital in the spring with a sword on her hip and a face like winter, and that the younger princess, barely 15, had been sent 2 years ago to a sect in the southern mountains to study, and had not been heard from since. He filed every name. He filed every face. He arranged them in his mind the way he had once arranged the load-bearing walls of a building. Asterisk, this one holds. This one breaks if you push here. This one looks decorative, but you cannot remove it without bringing down the roof. Asterisk. By the time the footsteps came running down the corridor outside, he had built a small first map of the world he was now standing in. The door slammed open. A young man strode in, tall, severe, robed in northern gray and silver with a long Jian sword at his hip. The torchlight from the corridor flared behind him, making a corona around his head. Behind him came another young man, shorter, broader, a spear case slung diagonally across his back, with a face like a thunderhead before it breaks. Chen, Xuan Ye, his brothers, Chen Mo, Xuan Ye, felt something happen inside the new chest. Something small and surprising. It was not his own. It was a leftover. A residue. The boy Xuan Ye, in the half-second before death, had loved these two men more than he had loved anything in the world. The body remembered. He let the body have it. His eyes filled. The breath caught in his throat. He half rose from the bed and then sagged, the way a sick boy who has just woken from a poisoned sleep would sag, and the older of the two crossed the room in 3 strides and caught him by the shoulders. Asterisk little Ye. Asterisk, said Chen, and his voice, Chen Mo had not expected this, was not severe at all. It cracked on the second word. Little Ye, open your eyes. Big brother, whispered Xuan Ye, because he could feel that this was what the body wanted to say, and the body's wants were useful here. Xuan Ye was already at the bed, on the other side, and he had picked up the bronze cup from the table, and the spear case on his back creaked because his shoulders had gone tight enough to bend wood. Is this, Chenji, is this? Set it down, said Chen, without looking. Don't touch the rim. We'll need it tested. Xuan Ye set it down. He set it down with such care that he looked, for a moment, less like a young warrior and more like a man holding a piece of his own broken bone. Wei Lan, he said. Wei Lan gave it to him. I saw it. At the banquet. I saw it and You are. Chen's voice was very quiet. Not here. Not now. Later. He bent down. He pressed his forehead, very lightly, to Xuan Ye's. His hands shook on his little brother's shoulders. Xuan Ye, lying in his elder brother's grip, felt the man's qi, warm, controlled, oceanic, flow gently into his own meridians as Chen checked for damage. The Codex inside him, like a clever animal that knows when to play dead, slid sideways into a fold of his soul and disappeared. What Chen found, after a long minute of examining, was a body that should not have survived, a heart that had stopped, then started, a spiritual root that, and here Xuan Ye felt his elder brother's qi hesitate, almost stutter, almost flinch, was no longer the frayed silk thread of memory, but something else. Something thin still, yes, but whole. Something that had been unsealed in the night. He did not flinch outwardly. He drew his hand back and sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. You should not be alive, Chen said softly. By every law of medicine, little brother, you should not be alive. Xuan Ye let his eyes close. He let his lips tremble. He let his voice come small as the boy's voice in the memory. I dreamed, he whispered. Big brother, I dreamed of mother. Chen's breath stopped. I dreamed of mother, said Xuan Ye, who had never met that woman, who knew her only through the boy's memory of warm hands and a song about cranes. And she put her hand on my chest, big brother, and she said asterisk not yet, my little one. Not yet, asterisk. Across the bed, Xuan Ye sat down on the floor. He sat down very suddenly, the way a man sits when his legs have stopped agreeing with him. He put his hands over his face. After a moment, he made a small, ugly sound. The sound of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just been told he is allowed, briefly, to put it down. Chen Mo, inside the boy, watched this. He watched it with 2 minds at once. The wolf watched and noted, asterisk useful. Their love is real. Their love is exactly what I need. They will burn the world for me. I will not have to ask, asterisk. The other thing in him, the smaller, older, almost dead thing, the part that had once been a boy named Chen Mo who carried fevered roommates to hospitals, watched too. And that part of him, very quietly, hurt. They are real, the small part of him said. Asterisk, these two are real. You will not feed them to anything. Asterisk. I know, the wolf answered mildly. That is why we will be careful. Xian Chun had bent forward again. His big hand had cupped the back of Xuan Ye's head, gently, the way a man cups the head of an infant, and was holding it there as if afraid to let go. Sleep, little one, he said. We are here. We will not leave you tonight. Big brother, whispered Xuan Ye. Who would do this? Cousin Wei said it was wine. He smiled at me, big brother. He smiled. There was a silence. Xuan Ye, from the floor, said in a voice that did not sound like the warm, laughing voice from the boy's memories at all. It wasn't him. You, said Xian Chun warningly. It wasn't him. Xian Yu's voice went flat. He hasn't the spine. He hasn't the coin. Someone paid him. You, brother. Xian Yu lifted his face. His eyes were wet, but not soft. A letter came this evening. Did you read it? Did you read the letter? Xian Chen's hand on Xuan Ye's head was very still. I read it, he said at last. From whom? Xuan Ye asked, sleepily, the way a half-poisoned child would ask, on the edge of dropping back into a doze. Neither brother answered him. But Xuan Ye, on the floor, said softly, from a friend in the capital. A friend who would prefer to remain a friend. And, said the boy's small voice. And the friend says, said Xuan Ye, that there is a wager being run in a tea house in the inner city. A wager on whether the third son of the Beihuang Wang will live to see 17. And, said Xuan Ye, in a voice so small it would have hurt to hear, if you were the kind of man who could be hurt by such things. The book is being kept, said Xuan Ye, by men who answer, at 3 removes, to the household of the second prince. The boy in the bed gave a small, exhausted sound. The wolf and the boy, behind the eyes, made a careful note. Xian Chun, after a long moment, drew the blanket up over his little brother's shoulders. Sleep, he said again. Little Ye, sleep. Tomorrow your big brothers will see to this. Big brother. Xuan Ye opened his eyes, just a little. The lashes lifted. The dark behind them was, for a half-second, not a child's dark at all. It did not last long enough for either of his brothers to see. I'm glad you're home, he whispered. Xian Chen's face did something complicated. Sleep, little one, he said hoarsely. We are home. And the wolf, lying in the warm circle of his elder brother's arm, closed his eyes obediently. He did not sleep. He listened. He listened all night. They left him near dawn. Xian Chun, at the door, paused. He looked back at the small, thin shape under the blanket, at the dark spill of hair on the pillow, at the rise and fall of a breath that was finally steady, and he said something almost too soft to hear. I will burn the South, he said, before I let them touch you again. Then he closed the door. Xuan Ye lay very still under the blanket until the footsteps had gone all the way down the corridor, and the corridor had been quiet for a count of 200. Then he sat up. The room was gray now, just before sunrise. The oil lamp had burned out. The bronze cup with its green stain still sat on the table, and that was good. That was very good. The cup was evidence, and the cup was theater. The cup would do work for him later. He swung his legs out of bed. He moved silently. The body, which had been a half-dead stick yesterday, obeyed him better than he had any right to expect. He padded barefoot across the cold floor to a small lacquered chest at the foot of the wall. He opened it. He took out, from the bottom under a pile of unworn winter robes, a thin string-bound book whose pages were yellow with age and water damage. Foundation Breath Manual, First Circuit, Volume 1. It was an absolute beginner's manual. The kind of book given to a child of 7 before he is allowed to enter the family training yard. The kind of book that a young man of 16, who was supposed to be at Foundation establishment by now, would be ashamed to be seen holding. Xuan Ye, in his old life, had owned this book and never read it. The elders had decided long ago that his meridians could not bear even the gentlest circulation. He had been forbidden from cultivating. He had hidden the book anyway, from sentiment, the way a deaf boy might hide a flute. The wolf in him, this morning, opened the book like a man who has come home to a kitchen he forgot he owned and is hungry. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor. He read the first page. He understood it instantly, partly from the dead boy's intellectual memory of theory he had never been allowed to practice, partly because the Codex inside him, hungry, helpful, settled itself attentively against the back of his mind and began, very quietly, to translate. He closed his eyes. He breathed in, the way the manual described. The pale chi of the northern dawn, thin, cold, edged like a knife, came in through his nose, his pores, his crown. It touched the place under his breastbone where the Ember slept. The Ember opened a small black eye and ate. What happened next, on the floor of that dim gray room, would have made every elder of the Xian clan stand up out of his chair and choke on his morning tea. Heaven and earth, chi poured into the boy in the way water pours into a bottomless well. The first cycle of the breath, which should have taken a child a quarter hour to complete, completed in under a minute. The second cycle took less. The third less. The Codex was not refining chi in the way other techniques refine chi. The Codex was simply swallowing it, like a dragon swallowing a river, and the heavens did not seem to have noticed yet. The first stage of body tempering, which the boy had unlocked the night before, deepened, filled out, became real. The thin meridians thickened, the way a riverbed widens during the spring flood. The frail muscles along his arms tightened by the smallest, most invisible degree. Then he stepped, quietly, decisively, without ceremony, into the second stage of body tempering, and then into the third. He stopped there. He could feel that he could continue. He could feel that, if he wished it, he could ride the morning all the way through body tempering and probably into the early steps of chi condensation before the breakfast bell. He could feel the Codex, eager as a kept dog, panting at the prospect. He did not. He opened his eyes. He closed the manual. He set it back in the chest, under the unworn robes, in exactly the position it had been in before, and he closed the lid of the chest with no more sound than a moth's wing. Body tempering, third stage, was already a miracle by any measure of his old life. But for the world he was now in, for the household that thought him a broken-meridian half-corpse, third stage was an alarm. Third stage, in a boy who had been declared incurable, would bring elders to his door before noon. He needed less than a miracle. He needed an explanation. He needed something his brothers and the household could accept. The boy clung to life. The boy's meridians, in the shock of the poison, repaired themselves. The boy is now perhaps able to cultivate at the most basic level, perhaps. A level beneath suspicion. A level that brought sympathy, not attention. Mother's blessing, he thought, with a thin internal smile. Asterisk mother's blessing. I dreamed of mother. She said not yet. Asterisk, and the boy is now, by some quiet grace of heaven, body tempering first stage, frail, slow, improving, perhaps, all the way to second stage by the new year if he is good and drinks his medicine. The Codex, inside him, settled into the lie like a cat settling into a sunny windowsill. He understood now, with a clarity he had not had even an hour ago, the shape of the long road in front of him. He would not be a sword in the light. He would be a knife in a sleeve. He would build his cultivation behind doors. He would hide every breakthrough behind a smaller breakthrough. He would let the world watch him climb the lowest steps very slowly, while underneath he climbed the highest steps 2 and 3 at a time. He would be body tempering stage 1, in the eyes of his family, for as long as he could possibly stand it, while in the dark of his own dantian, he became something else entirely. And every time someone, Wei Lan, Madame Su's sister, the second prince's envoys, anyone, looked at the thin pale boy in the corner and decided he was harmless, decided he was opportunity, decided he was leverage against the Bei Huang Wang's 2 real sons, every time. The Codex would feed. He stood up. He walked, on quiet feet, to the small bronze mirror on the far wall. The face that looked back at him in the gray dawn was still beautiful, still pale, still a 16-year-old's face, soft-lipped and long-lashed. But the eyes had changed. The eyes had been a boy's eyes when he had first looked into this mirror at midnight, frightened, faintly curious, freshly arrived. They were not a boy's eyes now. They were not exactly a man's eyes either. They were the eyes of something old that had decided, at last, after 31 quiet years of being mauled by the world, to bite back. Chen Mo, Xuan Ye, looked at himself in the mirror in the gray dawn of his first morning, and at last he allowed the wolf its small reward. He smiled. The smile was small, almost demure. The smile of a sickly boy who has decided to be brave for his brother's sake. You could have put that smile on a temple altar. Behind it, in the dark behind the eyes, the wolf grinned a different grin entirely. "Cousin Wei," he said softly, to the empty room. "Second prince." Whoever else. He let the names hang in the cold air. "I am going to be," he said, with a kind of gentle reverence, as if he were taking a vow before a god he had only just met. Asterisk, so kind to you. Asterisk, I am going to be so very, very kind to all of you. I am going to smile at every banquet. I am going to bow at every gate. I am going to thank you for every gift you send me, even the cups." He turned away from the mirror. "And by the time you understand," he said, almost to himself, almost happily, "by the time any of you understand what is happening, you will already have been dead in your own houses for a long, long while." He went back to the bed. He lay down. He pulled the blanket up to his chin and closed his eyes and made his breath even and slow, the way a half-poisoned boy's breath should be in the gentle aftermath of his recovery. And outside the window, the first pale light of the northern sun began to slide across the snow. ## Part 6. A promise to mother at the window. There is one more thing to tell of that first morning before this chapter closes. A servant came in at the second bell with a covered tray. A young woman, perhaps 18, perhaps 19, in the dove-gray robes of an inner court attendant, with a long single braid down her back and eyes the color of clear river stones. Her name was Nether. She had been assigned to the third young master's wing for 2 years. She had been one of the few servants in the household who had spoken kindly to Xuan Ye without being told to, on her own, simply because she had pitied him. She came in with the tray. She saw him awake. She nearly dropped the tray. "Young master." He smiled at her, the small frail smile he was practicing now, the smile he was going to wear like a coat, and he said, "Good morning, Nether." She stood frozen. She had not heard him say good morning to her, voluntarily, in 2 years. I brought your medicine, young master, and a little porridge. The kitchen said you should not eat anything heavy yet. The physician will come at the third bell." Big young master gave instructions. "Thank you, Nether." She came over slowly. She set the tray on the bedside table. Her hands shook a little. Xuan Ye, watching her with the part of him that had been an architect once, noticed it and filed it. Asterisk, she is afraid for me. She is also afraid of someone. We will find out who, later, and whether she is useful. Asterisk. "Nether," he said. "Yes, young master." He looked up at her, with his sickly boy's eyes, and he said, very softly, "Can I ask you a favor?" "Anything, young master." "The cousin who gave me the wine last night," he said. "Wei Lan." She stopped breathing. "Has he been seen this morning?" Xuan Ye asked. She wet her lips. They say he left the estate before dawn, young master. Before big young master could send for him." "Of course he did," said Xuan Ye, with a gentle little sigh, and let his eyes go wet for a moment, as if disappointed by the unkindness of the world. "Of course he did. Well, it is not my place to chase him. Big brother will handle it." He paused. He looked, almost shyly, up at her. "Nether, if you hear, in the household, anywhere, the kitchens, the laundry, anywhere, anything about where Cousin Wei has gone, or who he has spoken to, or who he is afraid of, would you tell me first?" Before Big Brother? She stared. Not because I want to do anything, he added quickly, lowering his lashes the way the boy used to lower his lashes when he was afraid of being scolded. Only because I would like to understand, Nyener. I would like to understand why someone wanted me to die. Big Brother will not tell me. Big Brother does not want to frighten me. But he swallowed. The throat muscle moved in a way she could not look away from. I am tired of not understanding, Nyener. There was a long silence. Then the young maid, with the riverstone eyes, did something very small. She knelt. She set her forehead briefly against the wood floor. Young master, she said, I will be your ears in this house. I swear it. He let her see him smile. That's one, said the wolf, behind the boy's face. Thank you, Nyener, said Xuan Ye, who had never had ears in this house before, who had never had anyone in this house at all but 2 brothers and a dead mother, and whose collection of pieces on the board had just, in the space of one breath, doubled. She rose. She bowed. She left. He waited until the door had closed. Then he got up, slowly, frailly, like a recovering boy, and he walked to the window. He pushed it open. The cold of the north came in. It was a beautiful cold. It smelled of pine resin and old snow and faintly, of the smoke from kitchen fires on the far side of the estate. Below him, in the courtyard, 2 old gardeners were sweeping snow from the path with long bamboo brooms. Beyond the courtyard wall, the wider city of Beihuang lay in its white morning hush. Beyond Beihuang, the mountains. Beyond the mountains, the frontier, and his father, whom he had not yet met in this life and would not, he suspected, meet for a long time. Beyond the frontier, the demon beasts and the dark mages and the things without names. Beyond all that, far to the south, in a palace in the inner city of the capital, a 67-year-old emperor was coughing into a silk handkerchief, and 7 princes were watching that handkerchief with 7 different kinds of patience. 2 of those princes had a daughter each. One of those daughters rode through the spring streets with a sword on her hip and a face like winter. The other had been sent to a sect in the southern mountains and had not been heard from in 2 years. Xuan Ye, the 3rd son of the Xian clan, the broken-meridian boy who had died last night and woken up someone else, stood at his window in the gray dawn and let the cold of the north touch his face. Mother, he said softly, to the dead woman whose hands he had never held, whose song about cranes lived only in another boy's memory, whose face he had only seen in a portrait on a shelf. Mother, I am sorry. I know I am not your son. I know I am wearing your son's face. The wind shifted the dark hair across his forehead. I will be kind to him, he said. I will be kind to your son. I will not waste his face. I will not waste his name. I will keep his brothers alive. I will keep his house standing. And the men who heard him, the men who would have heard him for the rest of his short life, if he had had one, I will eat them, mother, quietly, one after the other. I will eat them, and I will get fat on them. And your son's brothers will never have to lift a finger, and your husband will never have to leave the frontier, and no one in any tea house in any inner city of any capital will ever again wager on whether one of your children lives to see 17. He smiled. It was not a kind smile, but it was, in its way, a son's smile. Wake your other children up gently, mother, he said. I have arrived. He closed the window. He turned back into the room. The bronze cup with its green stains still sat on the table, catching the new morning light. He looked at it. He smiled the small smile again, the demure smile, the practiced smile, the smile he was going to wear like a coat. Cousin Wei, he said, almost lovingly. Let us begin. End of chapter 1. See you guys in chapter 2.